Today we're going to start our discussion about trigonometry. So there's just a couple things that you need to know about your study of trig. One of them is the trig functions: sine, cosine, tangent. These are abbreviated: sine, cosine, and tan. And what are these functions? These are ratios of a right triangle. So let me give you a right triangle. Well, maybe my pen doesn't act up here. There we go. There's a right triangle. Typically we use, again, that Greek alphabet theta. And theta is just the angle that we are looking at. And so if we're looking at theta, the side opposite the angle is called the opposite angle. The side next to the angle is called the adjacent leg. And the side across from the right angle is always called the hypotenuse. So what is trig? Trig are ratios, and the ratios of this triangle are sine. We take the opposite leg over the hypotenuse. On the cosine, we take the adjacent leg over the hypotenuse. And tangent, we take the opposite leg over the adjacent leg. So press pause. Make sure that in your notes you have your right triangle and you have these definitions down perfect. I'm going to stop for a second and then I'm going to pick back up. There are actually 6 trig functions. You just looked at 3 of them. Let me show you again. Here's our picture, theta. This is the opposite leg. This is the adjacent leg. And this is the hypotenuse. There's 6 trig functions. You just looked at the sine, the cosine, and tangent. And there's actually 3 more. And these are called what we call the reciprocal functions. And reciprocal means 1 over. So we know that sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. The reciprocal functions are going to be the reciprocal. So we're going to flip these ratios and redefine these as 3 different trig functions. So what are these called? These are called the cosecant, the secant, and the cotangent. They're abbreviated CSC of theta. The secant is secant of theta, and cotangent is actually abbreviated cotangent. So when you're asked, and you will be, what are the ratios of a particular right triangle, what we will look at is you have 6 trig functions. One is sine, cosine, and tangent. And again, these are defined as what? Opposite over hypotenuse, adjacent over hypotenuse, and opposite over adjacent. So a way that we can remember these is what we call SOHCAHTOA. And this is a way that we can remember the trig functions. What does this stand for? This stands for sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So let me just give you a quick scenario. And then again, on your notes, when people are talking about this SOHCAHTOA is a way that we can remember our trig values. So let's start with a right triangle. A right triangle that has theta here, let's say. And this value is a 4, this leg is a 3, and the hypotenuse is a 5. And you'll be asked to tell the 6 trig functions. And how do we get 6 trig functions? Again, 6 trig functions come from the 3 main trig functions, and then we're going to flip them. Okay, so these are called the reciprocal functions. And first off, what you want to do is label your sides. So if we're looking at this angle, the side opposite this angle would be our opposite leg. The one next to it would be our adjacent leg. The one across from the right angle, again, remember, is the hypotenuse. So how am I going to tell these ratios? Well, let's go back to that SOHCAHTOA. And again, what is SOHCAHTOA? SOHCAHTOA is a way that we can remember what the sign of a function means. We're going to take the opposite leg, which is 4, and divide it by the hypotenuse, which is 5. Cosine. What is cosine defined as? The adjacent leg, which is 3, over the hypotenuse, which is 5. So when you're finding a trig value, all you're doing is finding a ratio. For the tangent, we're going to look at the opposite leg over the adjacent leg. So we're going to take opposite over adjacent. And that's all there is to it. If we're talking about 6 trig functions, sine then goes with cosecant, so you just literally just flip those because they're reciprocal functions. You flip and you flip. So I'm going to give you a couple problems I'll ask you to try. Then I'll show you how we can use our calculator to do some trig values. And finally, we'll solve some triangles. So make sure that you get these notes down very well. And SOHCAHTOA, you'll want to put in your long-term memory.